Hello, everybody. It's so great to be on the line with all of you. And as people filtered in, I just want to start by saying I have been so looking forward to the conversation that we are going to be having today with a woman who is a true force of nature in the design world and beyond, the one and the only, the icon, Cheryl Durst. Cheryl, as many of you know, is the Executive Vice President and CEO of the International Interior Design Association, IIDA, but she is so much more than that title. She is renowned across our entire community. And today we're hoping to show you what might be a new side of her, a little bit more up close and personal. By way of Well Executive, we aim to introduce you to a new archetype of leader who sees their own well-being and the well-being of their people as part and parcel to their success. We're moving the conversation off the podium and onto the couch, metaphorically speaking, to talk about the intersection of life and leadership and the blurring of boundaries betwixt and between. I've always admired Cheryl's ability to connect the why of design to the who of humanity. We've hosted salon dinners together to really dig deeper into this, and we talked recently about how the purpose of design is to create a canvas for better communication and better performance. Cheryl's someone who has spent her career proving that design isn't about what's on the walls, it's about what happens to the person in the room. Today, we're going to dig into her personal rituals, her take on why designers are the ultimate stakeholders for people, and why she believes that being a parent makes her a better CEO. But before we officially dive in, I'd like to take a moment to thank our fantastic sponsor of the Well Executive platform, Daikin, leading innovation in heating, air conditioning, and ventilation technology for over 100 years, whose generous support makes this interview and the Well Executive platform possible. So here we go. Welcome, Cheryl.
Hey, Rachel. And if I have to be a force of nature, can I at least be sunshine?
Sunshine all day, every day, right on through the clouds. Granted. All right, Cheryl, you know that we like to kick things off with a bit of a speed round just to get things warmed up. So I'm going to ask you a series of rapid fire questions meant to
Okay.
elicit just a one word or one sentence response. So let's start here. Your breakfast of champions.
Yogurt,
Mm, simple. What kind? What flavor?
black cherry.
Ooh, I'm into peach
Mhm.
lately. If you could
Oh,
go back
nice.
to the start of your career, what's one thing that you would do differently?
I would tell myself it's okay to be afraid.
Mm. Favorite travel hack for road warriors?
Ziploc bags.
So old school. Uh,
It is really old school.
how about something people would be surprised to learn about you?
Wow, I'm trying to think. I mean, people know I'm a storyteller. They know I'm a people watcher. I'm an introvert.
Ah, okay, maybe we come back to this because I also am an introvert who masquerades as an extrovert.
Absolutely.
And that is a dissonance that has created friction for me in both my
Yep.
personal and my professional life. I bet it's the
Yeah.
same for you.
Yeah.
Okay, wake up song or morning ritual?
Uh, Morning ritual is 10 jumping jacks, but done to Frozen. Let it go.
I was literally just listening to that song this morning, but not of my own volition. Um, three words people might use to describe you as a boss.
um, Intuitive, smiling, intuitive, smiling, concerned.
All right. Advice that you'd offer your younger self.
Let it go.
Set to music. A quote
Hmm.
or a mantra that you live by.
Quote or mantra that I live by. Live for today, focus on tomorrow, and at some point the two will converge for you.
Oh my God, I feel like we could just end this webcast right now with all of this sage wisdom. How about best job title or honorific that you've ever had?
Oh, chief storyteller.
Ooh, love that one. And one thing that you do every day to take care of yourself.
Journal.
Mm,
Yeah.
I would aspire to adopt that habit. Love that. All right. Well, that was an amazing opening round. I feel like we could just mine your answers for the rest of this conversation, and we will come back to touch on some of these themes. But I wanted to start by talking a little bit about this concept of work-life balance. Like, what is work-life balance anyhow? And I think you have a really interesting take on work-life balance. When I took on the role of CEO at IWBI, I was finding it really hard to like make peace with the fact that a part of the job is experiencing everyone's worst day. Like I think Obama at Greenbuild a few years ago
Yeah.
said the poop rolls uphill, right? And so every family tragedy, every like work catastrophe, it all lands on your desk. And I found the emotional weight of that to be really hard
Heavy.
to manage. And I started asking like all of these other CEOs and people who ran their own businesses. And I found that there was a really interesting, in just like my limited survey, there was a really interesting difference between what I heard from men and what I heard from women. And I'm sure
Right.
this isn't universal because, in fact, I'm about to contradict it in my own experience. But generally speaking, the men said, I just partition. I walk through the door and I turn my day off. And
Wow.
then the women I spoke to said, I integrate, I hug my
Hmm.
children tighter. I try to appreciate all of the abundance that I have. I would say that for me, the higher the stress gets, the more the partitioning almost becomes a need, even
Yeah.
though whatever I'm setting aside will eventually catch up with me. But talk to me a little bit about like how you approach that and where would you fall, I suppose, on that continuum of partition versus integrate.
Um, it's so interesting, the partitioning versus integrate. I have so many thoughts swirling around, still reacting to the lightning round. I find them terrifying. I find it fascinating that rarely do people ask men about work-life balance, right? It's usually women who get asked about that, or how do you do all of that with whatever
Mm,
that is. Over the years, I have found that work life balance is largely a myth. I think people set up false expectations thinking that it's some 50-50 equation that you must do this and then you must do that. I am a huge proponent that work and life get to be very fluid. Um, Depending on, gender roles and what life is looking like in the moment. Are you caring for children? Are you caring for parents? Are you caring for all of the above? I think it's really interesting. There's some data that says now some 85% of new hires are choosing balance over salary, or prioritizing balance over salary, or the opportunity to achieve balance. And so I wonder about the partition setting and the compartmentalizing. Did that become a more rigid way to talk about boundary setting? And
mm,
traditionally, males have been better at setting boundaries, I think, than women, because we often find our boundaries have to be very porous.
right.
We have to allow them to be a bit more elastic. And I think that that's part of, in my life, I've celebrated and embraced the elasticity.
Mhm.
And you do what you need to do for your family. And if that means that I remember when my youngest, and I was still at home and I was breastfeeding when I was on a conference call. And you do those things that you need to do to make life and work well together.
Yeah.
There are days when it isn't necessarily easy, but I think some good lessons learned about juggling all of the things that we need to juggle. I remember my mom telling me that just make sure the balls that you juggle are rubber and not glass, because right, you need to allow them to bounce but not break.
Break. Yeah. Yeah. I love this idea of the porosity. And in fact, I feel that letting some of that porosity, like things seep in through it, is actually, I feel almost like incumbent on me as a CEO and an intersectional one at that, because I consider it to be a kind of like modeling that it's okay to show people that you are trying to do two things at once sometimes, that it's hard to, that it's important to say, that, sometimes our taking care of our family needs to come first, even though there's something else really important on the horizon. I too used to breastfeed quite frequently on conference calls. Thank God for the pandemic, and I used to adjust the Zoom camera like this. But
Yeah.
my son had a habit, and I breastfed him till he was like 2 years, 3 months. He used to have this habit of like he wanted to pull on my ear while he was breastfeeding. So you would see like just this little hand like creep up into the conference call. But I almost started to think of that as like metaphorical. And I remember a lot of parents, not just women in my office, um, remarking that that was like meaningful to them, that it helped them to feel much more comfortable being a parent at work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And it's, I am hoping that for many of us, the days of somebody side-eyeing you or looking squinty-eyed at you when you needed to dash out, when you got the phone call, that your child had a temperature of 101 and needed to be
right.
picked up from daycare or school, or sometimes pediatricians' appointments happen at 10 a.m. and you need to deal with that. I think I'm hoping we have societally and culturally gotten better
Yeah.
about understanding that life and work need to meld,
Yeah.
and they don't need to be diametrically opposed. But we also have to work really hard at doing that. And that means speaking up and advocating for yourself that, here are in the 10 things that I need to do today. One of them needs to be a pediatrician appointment. And maybe I jump on a Zoom in the parking lot from the pediatrician.
Again, thank God for Zoom. And like one of the silver linings, I think, of the pandemic, or like the, long tail of stylistic adaptations that we've made post-pandemic is, being able to like you don't have to cancel that call. You can sometimes actually be on that call right up until the pediatrician says it's your turn, which I'm pretty sure I
Yeah.
did last week. You've said that you believe you're actually a better leader, a better CEO
Mm-hmm.
because you are a parent. Say more about that.
It's the juggling multiple priorities. It's it's sometimes doing some conflict negotiation between two wrangling kids, and not that I am implying that managing a staff is the same as managing kids, but managing people, regardless of age, whether they're 3 or 30, there are some built-in skill sets about just sitting down and calmly having a conversation.
Yeah.
I hope that I don't mom as a verb, my staff. But sometimes acknowledging that nurturing side, the let's sit down and talk about this side, I understand what happened was terrible, but let's think about some alternative ways we can deal with this situation. And that's just not necessarily a maternal instinct, that's a human instinct. And I think that, whether you're a parent or an aunt or an uncle or an older sister or an older brother, that being with people that are family, and often just being a family member, helps a lot when you are a part of a work community as well.
Yeah.
And it is some of those same skills that have us manage a Thanksgiving dinner can be the same skills that you're setting up a successful meeting. Right?
Yeah.
It's about the experience of being human.
I think it'd make a great article series or a book. Just, everything I learned about being a CEO, I learned from my 3-year-old. But I mean, for me, one of the things I feel that I have learned is just how to give myself and other people around me more grace. Like having a baby and trying to be CEO at the same time during a very challenging, period of humanity, like practically broke me. Let me be really honest. But allowing myself to be a little bit more human, even in front of my staff or in front of my community, and giving myself that grace, I think made me far more apt to give that much more freely to other people
Yeah,
around me, just in
yeah,
light of just how much you realize people are managing,
yeah,
often in the
yeah.
background.
I remember when my daughter was 6, and we were at home, and I was rushing through a bunch of things and getting some things done, and she was doing the tugging on me, mom, mom, mommy, mama. And then at one point she just said, mom, look at me. And that lives in my head because I often think of that sometimes in an office or in a work situation. We are rushing through things and we get quite busy, and we sometimes forget to look at the people that we are working with. And so that look at me, see me,
Yeah.
listen to me, hear me. Like that's such a vital part of parenting, but also a very vital part of managing
I
also.
totally agree. And just that's another thing I feel I've learned as a mom is just the importance of presence, being fully present. I just feel my son deserves that. He said to me last night, like, I need your attention right now. And it was this like amazing call back to just being present to only one thing, which, is a downside of Zoom, that it's so easy to multitask your way through an
Yeah.
engagement. And there's really something to be said for that full presence. I want to hop to a related topic, and then we're going to get to some conversation around design, because you have so much to say and to offer and to opine on there. But just on the topic of like well-being, I love the vantage point that you have on your own well-being and how people approach this notion of personal wellness, that people almost act like it's procedural, something you can buy, something you can acquire. I mean, certainly Instagram or whatever social media platform is, your thing, feeds you that all the time. Like you just have to have this supplement. You just have to like go on this retreat. You just have to like have this app. But you don't think of well-being as something that comes through a transaction. You don't think of it as a procedure so much as a ritual. Talk a little bit about how you've come to that awareness.
So I think we live in this moment where everything is measurable, and we're told that if it has meaning, it can be measured. And I sometimes worry about over optimizing. And I think about we can score our sleep,
Right.
and we can graph our glucose, and we can track all aspects of our aging. And so, there are these moments where there's kind of health span versus lifespan, and it's like we're winnowing the joy at times out of being healthy. Like exercise feels good, but if you're constantly trying to hit targets, and I love the 10,000 steps a day, but
Right.
I feel that sometimes leaches the joy out of it a bit. And so, how can we balance that lifespan and health span? And I go back to it's the difference between habit and routine and ritual. And ritual is what gives us meaning, right? It takes those habits and those routines to that next level, and it brings the specialness back. It certainly brings the personalization back. And so, if you have a series, if you have your exercise routine, what can you do to increase the joy and make it meaningful and make it more like a ritual? And is that your favorite music, or you're doing it in your favorite place, or are you doing it with your favorite people? And so instituting right in a low impact way some ritual to make it special and to keep it special.
Yeah.
um
Even
and
just
and
that reframing of like process or procedure or routine to ritual shifts your entire attitude. Like one of my favorite Peloton instructors often talks about like she'll remind you at the very peak of the workout when you're like cursing her and yourself for having gone to the class that like this is a privilege. Like just remind ourselves of what a privilege it is to be in a healthful state in our
yeah,
own bodies and to tap into the inner wisdom of what it means to be well instead of a bunch of like external tools, sensors, quizzes, etc. Like when you
yeah,
are well, you know that you
yeah,
are well. And when you're
yeah.
not, sometimes you're not so aware of it because you've partitioned that.
Well, and that's that, right? Wellness is a feeling. And I think we've sometimes turned wellness into a graph or a chart, or it must be this. But like you just said, we know when we're well, and that's that tapping into how we feel. I also love that gut check and that intuition. That's a muscle that
Yeah.
we should always continue to develop, is that gut instinct, and just being really in tune to what our feelings are saying as to what, right, a set of data points might be saying.
It's interesting because I think about this in the context of the work that we do at IWBI and Well, and this notion of trusting that people can accurately relay their own experience in an environment. That this is actually, people think that it's like soft and squishy to do these surveys to be able to deduce whether someone is more productive, more engaged, more psychologically safe. But it turns out that's the most accurate way to gather that type of information across
Yeah.
most of these metrics, at least in terms of
Yeah.
the measurement tools we have available to us. So you use a really well-designed survey instrument. And people very reliably, when these are truly anonymous and people trust that they are, can report on what their experience is within that environment. And if you look at all the best research that we have on, well-certified projects and the kind of
Mhm.
benefits that occupants and owners have seen, almost all of those are derived primarily or exclusively from insights from occupant surveys.
Mhm.
And I can't like emphasize enough what an incredibly valuable tool that is
Yeah.
when they're used
Yeah.
appropriately.
And it's that, again, it's that fluidity, that melding. I'm not anti-performance, but something can perform well, it can feel good, right? It's how we kind of layer all of those things. Human beings are decidedly non-linear. We're very sensory, but it doesn't mean that we can't use those tools that keep us agile. And I love this connection between the brain and the body and the heart and the soul because we require all of them.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what's happening in design right now, because I want your hot take on a bunch of these topics. I'm sure a bunch of folks on the line do too. Um, I'll get to the heart of my question. Why are designers
Okay.
so stressed out right now? We're spending a lot of time talking to designers, from interior designers to architects, especially in preparation to launch our new designation for
Yeah.
interiors. And thank you so much for helping us to convene one of those recent roundtables. But designers, on the whole, to me, seem really stressed. Like they're taking it from all sides, whether
Yeah.
it's the ever-present, existential return to office, question, or the fear that AI is coming for their jobs, or just the mass amount of like reporting and paperwork and documentation. But give us your perspective on that. Like what's happening right now, not just in the design community, but like to the person
Yeah.
as design.
Yeah. I for sure am concerned about my community. There have been some obvious moments in our evolution as a profession, certainly that exacerbated concern. Right now, though, particularly the pressure that is on individual designers around creating optimal place. Some of that has to do in this post-pandemic moment that clients, consumers, average everyday people expect more of the places that they inhabit. So there's that factor. There's the simple working at whether it's with a product manufacturer or a design firm or a furniture or flooring dealership. I mean, like any other workplace, the economic stress is there. The expectations around designers, particularly around wellness and sustainability, that has everything to do with this expecting more. We want our places to keep us healthy and happy and nurtured. So the people who are creating those places, right, that are supporting us and amplifying us as human beings, the pressure is much greater. And then just the body of knowledge for design has so expanded. There's not a single designer that I know who double majored in biology or chemistry, but certainly understanding the components of the products that they are specifying to go in those spaces, that has increased exponentially. So understanding, I mean, design is about what happens on the receiving end, and designers are so invested in the health, safety, and well-being of the occupants of space, but that process around that, has amplified exponentially. And so most people stop at aesthetics when they think about design, but we know that design is so much more than that. And so the pressure in creating not just these beautiful spaces, but these spaces that amplify and satisfy and protect the human condition, the pressure around that is massive.
And you've also talked about the fact that many of the designers in your orbit, in your community, have a hard time articulating the extent to which they are having a meaningful impact on goals like health, like well-being. The research that supports that notion that, design, in fact, has an outsized impact on health and well-being according to the
Absolutely.
social determinants of health. more than your genetics, your access to healthcare, your lifestyle and behaviors is your physical and your social environment. So, talk a little bit about why you think that a lot of designers struggle to communicate the return on investment that they can deliver, and then some of the tools that you're putting into their hands to support.
I think it's almost like in so many other professions, we are asked not only to qualify, but also quantify. And so the client firmly believes that, there is a scope of service, absolutely, but they're wanting to see the absolute tacit benefit from the standard things that you're expecting, like lighting and floor covering and wall covering and furnishings, but then quantify for me why in totality this space is going to be good for my organization, for my people, for my brand.
Mm,
And kind of connecting that emotional ROI, the economic ROI, the intellectual ROI. It's connecting a lot of dots. And I feel particularly for younger designers, mid-career and senior designers have had a great deal more experience.
yeah.
But younger designers coming right out of school, a typical design school curriculum is not teaching you all of the things that you need to know to explain the return on investment for design to your clients. That is a little bit of on the job training, which is a stressor in and of
Mhm.
itself.
Mhm.
Again, because that degree of responsibility for the client and being a good steward of clients' dollars adds to that pressure. And so I think the more in an undergraduate curriculum, if there are any educators who are tuning in, the more that we can teach young designers, emerging designers, what being billable means, but then also the attributes of place and how we equate that to the current economics of business is a really valuable skill.
Well, one thing that we've done to try and help out a little bit is to aggregate the best facts, the best stats for how design can elevate the human experience,
Mhm.
health, performance, productivity. We've put all of that best research into one place in our second edition of Investing in Health Pays Back. It's a free download, and we've got other support that you can download alongside of it, like slides that you can embed in your presentations. Every time we highlight the findings from this report, the jaws are on the floor. So if you haven't downloaded that report just yet, the team is going to put the link into the chat where you can go to grab a copy of it. And especially if you look at, I can't remember what we call it, but like the executive summary, we give a lot of those stats and facts. And it's not just on healthy buildings writ large, it's like divided up according to like biophilia or air quality. Um, really trying to help people have more like concrete evidence and all the citations right there in the report too. So thanks for
Right. Yeah.
the opportunity to
Yeah.
talk that for a minute.
Yeah, and organizations like and especially IWBI, the wealth of research that's available for designers, case studies,
Yeah.
metrics, having that accessible, readily accessible, and available for designers to be able to turn to that as a resource is incredibly powerful. Increasingly, designers are being asked, and all design professionals are being asked to justify the why, right? And you alluded to this earlier. I'm a firm believer that everywhere has a why, but increasingly you have to justify that why. And
Mhm.
so those kinds of resources are an invaluable resource for designers in justifying the why.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we all say we wish we could get past having to justify good design or justify healthy buildings. Nobody asked for the ROI on Christmas decorations or coffee in the breakout room. Maybe we'll get to that point eventually, but for now, let's just put some more tools in our toolkit. And
Yeah,
speaking of tools in the toolkit, and to plug one of your offerings, you all have developed, I'm fascinated by this, a certified design futurist course. What
absolutely.
what does it mean to be a certified design futurist?
Well, this is very much about IIDA leaning into the skill set around strategic foresight,
Mm,
and right, it's not predicting the future, but it is a rigorous process, a methodology, and design is inherently about process and methodology. But this is a strategic approach about assembling decided signals and factors to help companies and brands and organizations look forward, right? We are so immersed in the now, but it's also preparing an organization, engaging an organization for near next and then next, and it's a really rigorous process, and we have created a 10-week course for designers, and actually anybody outside of the industry as well who's interested in this practice. It's open to real estate, it's open to product manufacturers, but to better engage your client in thinking about what's next for their particular industry.
So I want to ask you for some thoughts on what's next, but we also have some other icons in design that are hanging out here on the line. I saw, for instance, Linda, the amazing Linda Sorrento send a
Ah,
note. I would encourage anyone who's on the line to add your thoughts into the chat around what you see coming down the line where design is concerned. But Cheryl, you have such an amazing enterprise view. I don't know if you are officially a certified design futurist or not, but I certainly consider you to be somebody who has a crystal ball of sorts. So forecast a little bit what you think is coming. There's so much disruption happening in design. Some of it is, I think, really good. Some of it is a little foreboding. What do you see maybe in like the midterm and then the long term in terms of how it's going to impact the work that designers do and the context in which they're operating?
I think that all of us engaged in the built environment and all of us engaged in the human condition and in wellness. I am a firm believer that kind of this next stage will be looking at preparedness, wellness as being ready. And for me, that speaks to resilience. Resilience is not a new term or a word for any of us, but how are we looking at human beings? How are we looking at the spaces that we inhabit? How are we looking at organizations being prepared for, I hate to say it because it makes me sound like a pessimist, but the next disaster, the next downturn?
Yeah.
How can we be more resilient from a human standpoint, more resilient as a brand, more resilient as an organization? And so the physical environment, deeply investing in spaces around longevity, spaces that will last, spaces that contribute to the environment rather than taking away from it. How are we as human beings, prepping for our, right? We're all living longer, but, how do we live a longer life with quality? I think about from a brand standpoint, we talk about crisis PR. Would
Mhm.
that exist if we were better prepared as resilient organizations? So I see this whole arena as readiness becoming the new wellness. And
Mhm.
so there are, many entities, that's from real estate to design to not-for-profit organizations, deeply involved in helping people thrive and not just survive. It's an entire area of study that personally I'm very fascinated by. Also, it extends to, as we are looking at pioneering and exploring living outside of the realm of Earth, how can we prepare to be more resilient to live off of this planet? So there's that piece of it. So that's distant for sure, but it is within the planning realm. And so how do we start thinking about resilience and preparedness as kind of this next level phase?
It's a really interesting way in which you're approaching the definition of resilience. I think at least in the community that I've been most entrenched in green buildings and healthy buildings, our initial era of conversations about resilience was really about how buildings bounce back and how,
Right.
operations can avoid being disrupted. And now I think the conversation more and more is shifting to how people bounce back. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe how buildings help us to rebound or help us to heal. But it is a bit more of like a human or people-centric conversation, which is not to diminish the importance of buildings, that can sort of weather the storm. But I think in many ways, it's a much more like powerful and engaging way of approaching the same conversation.
Yeah, yeah. And these places that we inhabit, and whether we live there or work there, this idea of longevity residences, are we, and it's not just senior living, but it's, how we're aging in place. And do these physical structures that we inhabit how do they amplify and support our longevity, right? And it's not just where we live. I think about schools, right? I think about higher education. It has everything to do with infrastructure, but with this resilience mindset.
We could have a whole conversation about longevity. Right now, I feel like the wellness community, particularly around consumer products, is like obsessed with this notion of longevity. But I find that in the design community, people are much more gravitating, as you're saying, to having conversations about health span as opposed to lifespan.
Mm-hmm.
That it's less about
Correct.
living longer and more about living well for the years
Mm-hmm.
that you have. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and, as someone who has aging parents who are really leaning into that idea, I have such like a depth of appreciation for the difference between just living and living with that, really elevated
Yeah.
quality of life.
Yeah. And it's, not, and it's also like, how am I preparing my children to think about the fact that I may be living with them at some point? I think those were conversations that, almost like financial literacy, can we have better literacy around longevity and, what mid-stage and senior stage of life starts to look like, and really healthy conversations about our lifespan and our health span.
I do find that most of my friends who have parents of a similar age are not having those conversations with their parents. It's something that I don't take any credit. My parents have been so proactive in really thinking about setting themselves up to age in place, as so many baby boomers want to do. But this has been a really exciting strand of conversation that we've been brought into as a part of the Well residential launch. Just what are we doing in the design of our homes to really prepare for aging in place? If
Mhm.
not to make them fully accessible, to make them easy and inexpensive to retrofit.
Yeah.
For the multi-generational home we just designed with my parents, it was about the ability to create separate living spaces for privacy, and then being able to open up those spaces for togetherness. That was like a major design consideration for us to think about what it would mean for two professionals to be working in the same place as, my parents as they're getting older.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really appreciate that design is prompting these conversations with families.
Hmm. Hmm. It's, so many of us are in that sandwich generation where we have young children, or, teenagers also inhabiting the same house as grandparents, and grandparents may still be working. And so your family room might look like a co-working space, and maybe you need more Wi-Fi. And there are all kinds of things to think about, right? It's not haphazard, but, really embracing a multi-generational life, not just at home, but at work too, because, as we know, there are, at least 5 generations, if not more,
Right.
currently in the workplace.
Right. Well, and there's a longevity component to that too, right? Like people who live in multi-generational homes, people who have regular interactions with their grandchildren tend to live longer and stay healthier
Yeah.
longer. So there's really something to be said. It's quite the hack.
Yeah.
It's what I
Yeah.
tell my mom all the time when I ask her to babysit for free. Just like, see, you'll live longer, better life for you.
That's right. That's right. That's a great way to position it.
I want to talk about a slightly different kind of caregiving, and that is being a caregiver for an organization. As a CEO, we touched upon this just a little bit at the beginning of our conversation, but you were one of my lifelines during the
Mhm.
pandemic, and when Black Lives Matter was really like at the forefront of our minds. People were marching in the streets. I was calling you to say like, what are you hearing? What are you thinking? And what are you doing about it, in particular within the context of your organization and your community? Because as a CEO, you become a caregiver in some way, shape, or form to the people inside of your organization. And for you, as an extension, your members. Talk a little bit about what you learned from that period of time and how you've carried some of those lessons forward.
Well, the other thing that you did, Rachel, that I valued, and yes, you asked me those questions from an organizational standpoint, but the first question you asked me was, how are you? What are you feeling? What are you thinking? You came in a good way. You came at me as a human before coming at me as a CEO, right? And I,
Mhm.
it is I'm a firm believer that designers are champions of the human condition, and I try to carry that into the office as well with my staff. You're a champion and you're a cheerleader, and you need to be a believer in whatever organization one represents. But particularly because the CEO of a design association, I so firmly believe that design is the most optimistic profession. It may not always feel like it, and I feel that optimism itself, it's like it doesn't require a copay. And when we can pass optimism on to others, that is invaluable. I think it's so easy in today's workplace. There's so many pressures on all of us. It's so easy to go negative, right? And we're all worried about everything, right? The state of the world is chaotic and it's complex. But I think there's always room to have time to have a conversation with someone that doesn't always have to be heavy. You can have a conversation about someone's favorite reality television show, or you can have a conversation about what someone's reading. But bringing that spirit of a bit of lightness and joy, I just firmly believes it makes such a difference in the workplace.
We're going to come back to that topic of joy because we have a little gift for everybody who's dialed in, courtesy of your smart friend, Cheryl Durst, because you've talked about IIDA being your smart friend. And I want you to explain that concept a little bit to everybody who's listening in. But one of the things I really admire about what you've brought to IIDA as a member association is really to make it feel less like what your association would be of a member association, like pay your dues, maintain your credential, whatever that is, as opposed to like a place for community and a sense of
Mhm.
belonging. And so, in part of what you all have done at IIDA is to almost personify IIDA as a kind of friend, a companion. Tell us a little bit about some of the ways that you've proactively done just that.
That's a little bit of our archetype, is that IIDA is your smart friend. Certainly, we know that associations can be bureaucratically intensive and administratively intensive and hierarchical, all those things. And all those earlier things you said, like join, stay, pay your dues, all that still matters.
Yeah, still
That
pay
all
your
still
dues.
very much
Pay your dues.
matters. But the community that has built itself around IIDA is very much people oriented, and recognizing that as an association we give a lot of things: professional development, lifelong learning, all of those things matter. But I'm also cognizant that human beings crave clarity and coherence and guiding, and when and where possible we try to offer resources and hints and tips. And so whether it's with our student members, our student chapters, or whether it's with designers who are just in the thick of it, in the midst of it, having offerings for them that feel like we care about your life as much as we care about your work. And so the persona, the voice that we talk about is IIDA is your smart friend. And it's an organization that you can come to when you don't just want that professional development, but you might need a little bit of career advice. Or I'm in the middle of this and it's not feeling right, and what can I do about X? Or
Mm,
I need to have some help with a salary negotiation. How can I have that conversation? Don't just give me numbers that I can go in and negotiate. Can you help me with talking points? And so
mm,
sometimes it's helping members have those hard conversations, or groups of people having those hard conversations. Because where can you turn to other than a friend sometimes with some of those questions? And I think we all sometimes struggle with help with those difficult conversations, whether it's with life or with work.
Here, here. Well, you're my smart friend. That much I can say for sure. And yeah, I love that you just have that supreme focus on bringing clarity. Um, because I think you're right. We're all reaching for that right now. I'm so enamored
Yeah.
with that. I literally, as a teenager, got it tattooed on my body
Oh,
and spent a year hiding it from my parents. But I was like, I wanted even back then to be called back to this idea of having clarity, like a sense of purpose in the life that I was living. And it doesn't always feel that way. But it's nice to have people that can call you back to it. Um, You mentioned joy.
Mm,
This is one of your favorite words of all time. Before I go on with this line of questioning, I want to invite anyone who's on the line listening to put in a question that they're interested in me asking of you, because I think we'll have a couple minutes to field one or two questions from the audience. But you very consistently try and connect the purpose of design to the notion of joy, to bringing joy, to
yeah.
finding joy, to delivering joy. And not just in how we design, but also in how we live. So much so that you actually created a guide, Cheryl's Guide
Yes.
to Joy, which we are going to share with all of the folks on the line because it really is just a lovely and inspiring piece. How can the pursuit of joy open us up to more possibility in our professional and personal lives?
I'm actually laughing because somebody wants to know what your tattoo says.
No, it
That's
literally says
this
clarity
is
in another
it says
language, but
clarity.
it
I
literally
love
says
that.
clarity. Yeah.
This is Alex Bonner from Philadelphia. Hey, Alex. Um, this pursuit of joy, a bit more sunlight in our life, being more optimistic, and then sharing, turning around. It's great to have all of that internally, but also externally and sharing that with others. I remember ages ago when I was a child watching Julia Child on PBS. And she literally, those early takes of her were live. And she had just had a fight with her husband. And she was whipping up a souffle. And she said, "Oh, this is going to taste terrible because I'm cooking angry." And she said, "You should always cook with joy." And that stayed with me because I think about that in terms of design, is that, designing with joy can be felt by the people who will inhabit that space. Designing with joy, designing with optimism. Um, uh, Design is altruistic because you are doing it in service of someone else. And I think about all the attributes of joy in a space, and whether it's light or whether it's color or whether there's some degree of softness. And it doesn't mean that, I move away from things like ergonomics. Like, we love a great ergonomic chair. It is good for us. But when it is a beautifully designed chair, it is sympathetic to the human body. Right.
Mm.
And so design should sing as well. And so that joy that designers feel as they're creating for a population or for an individual should be that same joy that we feel in space and in time. And so carrying that joy, and it's so easy to forget about it, right? But there are so many things about design that bring joy: how something looks, how something feels, that it makes you feel good when you wear it, when you sit in it, when you walk into it. Experiences bring joy. And I think we often, particularly in chaotic and complex times, we need those joy reminders. And so that, that little bit of dappling of sunlight when you walk into a space. I'm looking at your background, and just movement of the trees behind you, that's inherently joyful. And so sometimes it's not just experiencing the joy, but a reminder to look for the joy. And it's often in the small things.
Yeah, that is so true. And your story about Julia Childs reminds me of a really wonderful book. If anyone's looking for a light read, The Particular Sadness of Lemon Cake, which is all about a woman and her, emotions like seeping into what we bake. But in spaces too. I mean, I think that that is so true. And it's one of the values that or the aspirations that we've tried to bring forward with Well is making the experience of, pursuing a Well designation delightful. And I remember we were writing a letter to I think it was to our community when we were working on Well version 2. And I had talked about, making that journey of certification delightful, that we were aspiring to deliver that. And my assistant at the time, who's now our head of workplace well-being, came over and said, "I'm going to take this out of the letter because, like, clearly this is not the role of a certification. Like, there is no certification process that is joyful." And I agree, it's like a high bar, but it is something that we continue to intend toward. And boy, I really do think that we've taken some big steps toward that goal with the new
Yeah.
version as well that we're getting ready to roll out, and particularly the digital platform. Like, let's make these things about more than documentation. And maybe that's something that AI can bring, is, taking some of the drudgery out of our work because let the machine do that so that we
But
can actually focus on the most important work. And I know that's my last question for you really is about AI. And, there's there are plenty of things to be nervous about, but there's a lot to be excited about. And you definitely see both sides of the coin. So leave us with a little bit of joy and inspiration for what AI might bring that could actually enhance our experiences as design professionals.
I I think that what AI will allow us to do is to be more human. It will, like you were talking about, there are aspects to take some of that, the day-to-day rote, the drudgery out. AI can assume that administrative role. But I think this piece of us where we are very sensory, where we're very relational, where we're very non-linear, AI can't replace our agency. It can't replace our intuition. It can't replace our emotional coherence. We might have to work a little harder to hold on to it, but I think at the end of the day or decade or whatever that time period will be, I think that AI will force us in a really good way to be more human. And I can't ask for anything better than that.
Yeah, well, neither can I. But I totally agree with you that, AI, the machine, whatever, that will never replace humans. And in fact, I think it will continually call us back to what's unique about the human experience, what's irreplaceable. Um, I was hoping that I would get a good question in through the chat, but I want to take advantage of the couple extra minutes that we have since we haven't fielded one just yet, and ask you a little bit more about being an introvert. You and I share
Uh,
this in common. Like I've had many people in my lives, including Rick Fedruzzi. I remember I said something years and years ago about being an introvert. He's like, "You are not an introvert." I always describe myself as an introvert who masquerades as an extrovert. And one of the challenges of that is that because I present myself in many instances as an extrovert, of course, the world interacts with me like an extrovert. But
like an
because I'm
extrovert.
an introvert, that drains me. And so
Mhm.
I tend to leave these like conferences and speaking
Exhausted,
a
right?
shell of a human being. Like I just need to like sit on that plane. Thank goodness I'm on a plane because nobody talked to me. I just
Yeah.
like need to recharge. Talk a little bit about how you've managed that in your own life because I never would have guessed you were an introvert either.
I have, very often I'll, be in a very public place. I'll do a presentation, I'll be at a group event. I will sometimes go back to my hotel room and the emotional outlet, it's not sadness, but I will cry
Mm.
because I just have to vent and get that out. Like it's a lot. I also don't have brothers or sisters, so I grew up an only child, very shy, very introverted. I was a profound stutterer as a child, so
Mm.
kind of worked my way through that, and so I lived a portion of my life not saying very much, not being around a lot of people, and so I taught school for a while too, and that helped my presentation skills, that helped my being in front of people. And then I land, in this role and I am constantly in front of people, constantly talking to people. When you're managing an office, you're constantly talking to people. So I have to make sure to safeguard my quiet moments.
Yeah.
I am married to an extrovert, and he wakes up in the morning talking. He's also a morning person. I am a night owl, so there is all of that dynamic. But I have to safeguard my quiet moments because I require them.
Yeah.
I am not my best self when I can't, kind of internalize and have my quiet, cozy, leave
Yeah.
me alone
Yeah.
moments.
Yeah.
But I do need that emotional after being kind of overwhelmed by people. I do need to sometimes vent that, and sometimes that might be on a treadmill or a bike, and sometimes that's just having a good cry too. And it doesn't mean I'm sad, but it's like an excess of like
Yeah.
things get too peoply sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, and you got to find some outlets for letting that excess energy drain away.
Yeah.
My cousin moved in with me for a few years after he graduated from college, and in the mornings he would come out of his room and I'd be like having my quiet time making my coffee, and he'd start talking to me. I'd be like, "Look, I know it doesn't look like I'm working right now, but like I'm working. This is the first hour of my day that I am having
Yeah.
right now. I do think it's about establishing some boundaries to take care of yourself, and also just that inner wisdom, like to know that you're going to need it to prepare
Yes.
for the
And
price.
know your limit, because I can always feel when I'm getting close to like I need to back away now. I
Yeah,
think there are a lot more of us out there that are introverts masquerading as extroverts.
I
And we
agree.
kind of, we're cosplaying as extroverts, but when we take off our extrovert costumes, lean into that introvert. It's made you who you are.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so lean into that and celebrate your introvertedness, if that's a word. And there is a name. I think there is a technical term.
Ambivert. You're thinking
That's
of
it.
ambivert. Yes.
That's it.
Oh,
Yes.
look, our team created a poll.
We
Impromptu.
have a quiz.
Do
Oh, I
you
love that.
identify as an introvert, an extrovert, or both? And thanks to Chidima, I hope I'm not botching your name too badly, for reminding us of the term ambivert, somebody who straddles introvert and extrovert.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's Chidima. She's on.
Chidima,
She's
so sorry.
fantastic. Yes,
All
she is
right,
a phenomenal IIDA member.
nice
Thank
to
you for
have you.
and just earned her PhD. So
Congratulations.
congratulations. But that is, and that also seeing that poll pop up, it is a reminder that when you are doing surveys or responding to polls, we sometimes let our extrovert out to respond to those. Remember to give honest responses from your introvert heart. Also, I've had a lot of designers talk to me about this when they're talking about planning space for a group, and people will respond with their extrovert selves, and that's not always helping a designer kind of create the requirements around space. So remember to let your
Fascinating.
introvert respond honestly as well.
Hmm. Love that last little bit of wisdom. All right, team, can you tell us about the results of the poll?
Yeah. Who do we have on here? Oh,
All
look at
right.
that.
Interesting. Majority of people either straddling the line or self-declared introverts.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
fascinating. Well, thank you for that
Yeah.
impromptu quiz to the team that was working on that behind the scenes. Always some
Love that.
fun to get to know who's on the line. Cheryl, we could go on, and I really mean that. This has just been such a fantastic, wide-ranging conversation. So thank you. Thank you for joining us, and thanks for all of the different ways in which you dimensionalize this wonderful world of design.
Mm.
We hope that all of you on the line will tune in to our next Well Executive webcast featuring another one of our esteemed Governance Council members, also an icon in the world of design, Avi Rajagopal, the editor-in-chief of Metropolis magazine, will be joining me on May 13th, same time, same place. We're very excited to see many of you there. And thanks again for giving us an hour or so of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Rachel. I love your joy code. I think let's all stay joy coded.
Yeah, yeah, and you. And download that
Mhm.
guide for everybody on the
Yeah.
line.
Yeah.
Guide to Joy is a real treat, I promise you.
Yeah. Perfect.
Take care.